So we're just going to switch gears actually. So, like Cynthia mentioned, I've only been doing this for about a year. Basically, this will be basically what happens when we get our grubby hands on all your data that you've so carefully created. Here we have train collisions in Manitoba since 2004. If you've read the Free Press sometime in the last 2 years, you'll know that we absolutely love writing about trains. This particular project was in conjunction with Mia Rabson, who was our Ottawa reporter. And yeah, so.
What does red mean?
Oh, so we have a legend at the top right there, which means that these collisions have fatalities. So, so as Derek mentioned and a few others, a map should tell a story. Basically what we had when we created this map was basically two data sets that we melded together. We had obviously all the train crossings in Canada from GeoGratis and all of the incidents from Transport Canada. Transport Canada has infinite amount of data regarding collisions, whether they be train or planes or whatever. They're actually quite good, and all the data is free. So the biggest issue with this was actually melding the data together, to have all the incidents attached to the intersections. So for this particular map, we did pop into QGIS, but it's actually mostly done with JavaScript. So it's using a leaflet.js library. The reason for that is it actually works quite well with our CMS, so our content management system. We can pop it in there quite easily. It's easily embeddable. We also host the data ourselves rather than using a third party. Also, when I was building this, I really wanted to learn JavaScript, so. So it should tell a story. Basically, when we started, when Mia brought forward the project to me, it was essentially, I have all this data, what now? And it wasn't actually until we created this map that we kind of discovered what the story was. So if you, I'm actually just gonna open this up in Chrome because I think it might work a little bit better than in Internet Explorer. But where's my, there it is. So what we were looking for is obviously, like, whenever anybody's mapping anything, we were looking for patterns and we were looking for problematic intersections. At the same time we were doing this project, legislation was just being drafted late last year regarding basically what intersections should have what infrastructure in place to ensure that collisions are mitigated. So we wanted to pinpoint which intersections in the province, and specifically which in Winnipeg, didn't meet those thresholds. And I just... So like I said, we were looking for patterns, and actually as soon as we mapped it, we found a very clear pattern. It was actually east of the city in the arm of Springfield. There was actually 3 collisions within, I believe, 2 years. So if you look right along here, this seems to be a very problematic area, and as well right here. And that became the basis of the story. So a little, so 3 people died in the same area in a short period of time. That was one thing that we found. There have been 225 train collisions with vehicles and pedestrians in Manitoba over 12 years. It killed 25 people and injured 43. So that's quite a pretty stark number. Sorry, it's being quite slow here. There we go. One more. 4 of the locations are among the highest risk crossings in all of Canada. Obviously Waverley is one of them, and that's obviously one that's been in the news quite a bit. 13 of them are in a group of the worst 500 in the country. And so basically, I don't know the legislation off the top of my head, but what they do is they take a cross product of an intersection, so how many trains are crossing times how many cars are crossing, and add in some other factors, and essentially you get a risk product. So the nice thing about, again, using Leaflet is that it's highly customizable. We've been able to extract, you can click on any intersection and it will give you how many incidents, how many injuries, and how many deaths, the speed limit for both the train and the passenger vehicles. And then also you can see down here at the bottom that we have basically, we've added a national risk. So this one here is actually quite high. Also here, it shows the protection, so flashing lights and bells, and this is actually what the legislation was trying to change. So for any high volume intersection, it should have at least at least lights. So for anything over a 200,000 cross product, it should have also arms as well. So some of the things, so with web mapping, especially in our field, we can often overload the user with a whole bunch of different data. You know, we get data from either the province or any level of government, and we want to just pack it all in. We wanted the map to show absolutely everything that that we've discovered, and that's not really quite what we should be doing. There's been a shift in exactly what we should be showing the user. So some considerations when we built this particular map was we wanted to have a somewhat clear picture as soon as the user loaded the map as to what they were looking at. In fairness, it's probably, we've learned quite a bit more, or I've learned quite a bit more since I built this map. But the red obviously, but along with the legend, the red obviously shows that those are problematic areas, and like I said, have resulted in 1 or more deaths. But we have to do our jobs, right? So as opposed to having every single rail crossing in all of Winnipeg or all of Manitoba, that essentially puts the work on the user as opposed to us doing the work for them, which is what we should be doing. So it's just like writing a story, you have to be focused. So in this case, we used color codes and stripping out all other data, and we opted for this particular kind of sidebar window. So it works well on mobile as well, and that's a huge consideration for us, is it has to work on mobile. It's also been kind of a push for more static maps as opposed to them being clickable at all. So the other thing too, and the reason why we're using Leaflet and as well we're kind of going towards static maps, is load times. It's so important for us to take into account. Basically, we want to show the user all the information, but basically if it doesn't load within about 3 seconds, as they normally say, then you've lost the user and basically your work is all for naught. So you have to be very, like, I find you have to be very particular in what you're including in the map, and be pretty cognizant of of how big the file is. So some of the challenges with making a map like this for an organization like the Free Press is tight deadlines, right? The data set comes on a Wednesday and they want it done by Friday afternoon. That's a huge time constraint. With that is also catching some errors. So no government data is going to be absolutely 100% perfect. Actually, when we were going through this data, we did find one or two errors, and it's impossible for us to know whether there are more of them. We actually just know that there were some data issues in the specific areas that we were looking at east of the city, so in the RM of Springfield. We simply just don't have the time to comb through the data. So, yeah, and I think that's essentially about it. Like I was telling Cynthia, I had a PowerPoint presentation and it has copped out on me, so I'm just kind of going on my notes here. I just want to also, I had brought up as well the resulting story as well, which was Mia's story. And just on the sidebar here, I just want to point out these are the highlighted intersections that basically had work that needed to be done. And then this is how the map essentially appears on the site. So if you you can see here that we have to be very cognizant of essentially how the map behaves, however large the screen is. So, and that adds some constraints as well. You really have to make sure that you're only adding pertinent information. So, yeah, that's about it.
How, questions?
Yeah.
So does each point represent one incident, or could there be multiple incidents at each point?
So these points represent multiple incidents. So these are only intersections that have had any incidents at all. So the green ones mean that there have been incidents but no injuries. Yellow mean there have been injuries there, and red means that there have been a death. So in the case of Fairmont Road, there have been 2 accidents with 2 deaths. Yeah.
Right, so I guess just, I mean, it's possible you can have multiple incidents there, like, that aren't deaths. Like, you could have 1 death, 1 injury, 1 no injury. You'd have 3 points.
Yeah.
And so did you look at symbolizing this maybe a little bit differently so that you can use the size of the circle as, a reflection of the number of incidents?
Yeah, we went through a few different. Again, in the short time, we kind of went through a few different ideas of what we wanted to do. We didn't want to the size of that's a good point. What we did want to include was this information here, right? We really wanted to make sure that we included, how many trains there were per day and how many cars there were per day. That was kind of the basis for the story, was, like I said, the cross product. So there's a few different ways we could have done this. We could, like you said, we could increase the size of the circles. I also think that I was looking at it again this week, because this was actually something that was back in August. And if we were to look at, say, one particular stretch of railroad, say we do it here, it could actually be a static map. And the user could, as opposed to it being a map that you can kind of drag around and stuff like that, you could have it as basically a scroll map. So the user will just scroll down the screen, and we'll tell them, what information they should know at this point in the on the line. So at this point here, we could just have a little bubble essentially saying, how many accidents happened here without them actually having to click on anything. Yeah.
Yeah,
possible that, yeah, the red dot is probably one isolated incident, and you have the yellow dot that would perhaps have 100 incidents. And this is misleading information because you see the red dot and say, oh, look what dangerous is this because it was one there. But the yellow, you have 100 incidents is more dangerous than the red one. So
Yeah.
that is what can confuse the reader of the map.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, and I agree with that. I think that in more so than trying to draw the user into these red dots, I think initially we were actually just looking to map out for ourselves what were problematic areas outside of the city. So, like we said, we were looking for stretches like this, about 70. Like one of the bases for the story as well was that the vast majority of crossings in Manitoba are blind crossings. They're not controlled at all. So we were also focusing on patterns on lines as well.
Probably pop up with the graph bar. You can measure the number of incidents.
Yeah.
In red, blue, and green, and you can see by the highest size of the graph which was more than.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think you mentioned before, I mean, you suggested mouse overs. I think that's a good point because you can have a simple map and there's functions like mouse overs or other things that you can overlay that are, optional, which makes sense. But one thing that when I look at this, I noticed the first thing that struck me is that the red dots are further out from the center, which I'm guessing is probably because everything's going faster further from the city. But I didn't hear you mention, I heard you mention the volume of traffic, but I didn't hear you mention the speed of traffic in that risk factor. Is the speed or the speed limits enter into that?
Yeah, that is a factor as well in the overall risk, like the national risk that Transport Canada issues. But in terms of the new legislation where they were stipulating where certain safety infrastructure should be put in place, they're essentially looking at a cross product. So
it doesn't include the speed.
Not necessarily.
So this is an argument against that, right? In a sense, because I mean, if you were to look at correlation between the speed or
Yeah.
or distance from it, would say that maybe we probably should be taken into account because we have more fatalities where things are going faster, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Right, but it's the first thing that I noticed when I saw the picture.
Yeah.
And if they're leaving that out, that doesn't seem to make too much sense to me.
I think that the map shows the past very well, but it is very difficult to predict the future, which are the future policies according to this map.
Yeah. And like I said, it was and it was a complementary map, to the story. So it's, I think, in the 6 months since I've created this map, some lessons have been learned.
I'm just curious if you can comment on, say, it's a bit more of a business side of this question. Say it took you 20 man-hours to make this map, and then how does that correspond to the actual article with this map in it? Do you get enough extra views to make that financially feasible to the Free Press?
That's a good question. I think it would depend on the subject matter. I actually would argue that with a map like this, I would doubt that it would significantly increase or decrease page views, for the story. I think that if somebody's going to click on the story, it's because they were interested in rail safety, and without knowing that there's a map involved. I think that it's more added value. I wouldn't be able to actually correlate whether this equals a story going viral.
But I would think you would have a user that would spend more time on the site because of this, as opposed to looking at it on paper. You read the story, you look at the map, and you move on. But newspaper media is certainly moving towards digital, you know, for subscribers, and I think the advantage of having a map, you know, as part of the story is that you're engaging the reader for a longer period of time, or the likelihood of that occurring is greater.
Yeah.
Because you have an interactive component associated with the story.
And like I said, it's actually kind of a tricky, it's a tricky line to walk, because even in a situation like this, I found that this particular project actually ended up being quite slow. There's a lot of data in there still. And that was one thing after it launched. I kind of thought about it after, and I was like, it wasn't, you know, it also was slow among other things. And you have to sort of walk that line between, okay, do we want to include, you know, something that's very interactive that will, you know, glue the user there, or will it actually keep a regular, you know, somebody who's interested on the site, or will they be, or will they want to leave because it takes too long to load? So, I mean, that's something that we're grappling with right now. Is, you know, 3 years ago, all we wanted to do was drop a Google map into every story and have 1 million points on it, and, you know, everybody, you know, just let the user click through the dots. Well, no one's going to click through the dots, right? Like, we're not doing our job if we do something like that. So we're still kind of feeling our way through that. Yeah.
What caused the story was that someone's death, that family was trying to do it, and not trying to get pinpoints in there.
Yeah.
When you find a story, you have to have some cause or attachment to what.
Well, this was actually a good example of the map sort of driving the story, in the sense that, like I said, Mia had this set of data, and we knew that we were doing projects on rail safety. And it wasn't actually until we kind of got the sketch of this map and I sent it over to her, and she's like, oh, well, again, look at the RMM Springfield. And then, you know, as it turns out, because, you know, we will always do a news story when somebody dies in a train crash, or for the most part, that we have all that information of when and who was involved in those deaths as well. So that ended up being the kind of the lead of Mia's story, which involved this case from I think it was 2007. There wasn't necessarily a catalyst. There wasn't a timeliness to it.
I admire that, and again, it gives conviction to people who say, it's important. I guess, I'm not trying to get too deep.
No.
I don't have so much time, but when I'm looking at that map, I'm also looking at from what caused, not the intersection and speed, but also, was it someone not honking the horn, or whatever the process, could be a railroad company coming through Winnipeg, maybe was there a Calgary or south of anywhere? What's on the cart, what's on the trains, right?
Yeah, and that's.
Where does that go, or where do you stop? Just keep going further, because you're addressing some important issues, so how to stay there and wait for another incident to go, because they want to make a difference, so that won't happen.
I think the argument can be made that, you know, some things may be systematic and some things may be isolated. You know, in the case of this gentleman here, I don't know if it was this one, or in one of the cases the driver was drunk, as it turns out. So, I mean, an isolated incident, you can't blame a lack of lights in a situation like that, right? So.